Good afternoon, morning, evening, everyone. To our Babble listeners from around the world, I'm Megan Thomas, and I'm thrilled to be babbling with award-winning visual artist, Chris Soal. Chris is an emerging artist living and practicing in Johannesburg, using unconventional found objects, as you can see if you're watching the video, such as toothpicks and bottle caps, to offer us an interpretation of the world that we live in. He's designed a Lady Dior bag, which was featured in the Lady Dior Art Collaboration. And I must admit, I never would have thought a bag covered in toothpicks would look as very cool as it does. At risk now of making Chris seem slightly less cool, we met age 16 at a competitive high school poetry slam. Sorry, Chris. Hi.
Wow.
How are you? It's good to see you again. I mean, I've seen you since then, but that was basically the coolest time we've ever met up, other than today.
Wow. You completely jogged my memory there. I'd almost forgotten about that, but you're right. I think, we were 16. How young and fresh the world seemed back then.
Yeah. I mean, we were doing competitive poetry. I think we were clearly doing it right.
Definitely in the cool kid crew.
Yeah, absolutely.
Killing it in high school.
We are sitting with some very cool artwork behind us, which is, of course, yours. Sorry to the listeners of the podcast. You're going to have to tune in to tomorrow's episode, which will be the visual element. We're sitting in front of some of Chris's art. Where are we, Chris? And tell me a little bit about the room we're in.
Sure. So I'm in Cape Town. I'm here installing a show with my gallery, What If the World? And we're sitting actually in Tiny Empire, which is owned by my gallery director. And he's got a super cool setup, little soundproofed like boardroom, and brought one of my works out just to give it a bit of sparkle in the background. And it's a good time to be talking because now I'm busy processing everything that's happening with my show and in a little bit of a reflective space. And I think that, hopefully I make sense and we have a good chat.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm going to get onto your current show and stuff very soon, but I actually want to wind it right back before that.
Yes.
And ask you and pick your brains a little bit about where this all started. You're at this incredible point in your career, and I'm kind of interested to know kind of the first time you knew that art was not only something you wanted to do, but something that you thought you could make a career out of.
I think that happened quite late for me. I mean, some artists say like they knew ever since they were a kid that they wanted to be an artist. And I can look back on my life and kind of see a trajectory that kind of led me in this direction of like little moments that I piece together now with the hindsight that I have that kind of, show me how I've ended up where I am. But I think the decision to pursue fine art really kind of fully formed itself in the year that I spent abroad after finishing high school. So I moved to the UK and I was working in Surrey at a little prep school called Amesbury. And I was like just helping out, coaching kids, after school and, doing reading with kids in class and being an assistant teacher type vibe. And one of the things I started getting into there was, helping in the art department a little bit. And I think it was like an accumulation of a lot of different factors. Firstly, I'd done art through my whole schooling career, and I was like good at art in the sense of like you could draw well, and that was really a measure of being good at art in high school. And then I got to the UK and I befriended this art teacher, and I think she really like in a very gentle way kind of like started introducing me into contemporary art and especially what that meant in the recent like history of Britain, like kind of centered around the Turner Prize and the artists that had kind of like done their thing and used that as a springboard, and the young British artists and whatnot. And it was fascinating for me to find out that a lot of, I'd say almost 80% of them had studied one thing and then had kind of transitioned through meeting someone or taking an odd job or helping someone out. And there were kind of like multiple different side steps and whatnot until suddenly they arrived at like their niche and they found their kind of space. And so that kind of like also changed my perspective on my thinking around like what I have to be doing with my life, because it took a lot of pressure off, realizing that all these people had done one thing that led to another, and then they finally kind of found their way. it kind of like gave me the freedom to say, well, you'll find your way in the end. The sort of starting point doesn't really matter that much. And so, then for me, it was a question of like, well, what can I do that gives me the most freedom? And I think that year, kind of maybe in a very naive way, perhaps, but I think the idea of art really represented freedom for me. And yeah, I think I already knew at that early stage that, art was a non-linear career path that forced one to wear many different types of hats. So I thought it could really cater to my personality and, the different facets of myself that are interested in so many different things at once. And so far, I'm really glad that it has.
Yeah, well, so am I, because it means I get to talk to you about it. And so you then did your fine arts degree at Wits, is that right? I'm interested to hear, so once you'd kind of made that decision and then gone into this degree, whether the degree is structured in a way to give you the kind of freedom that a lot of artists feel like they need, and whether you think that kind of structure of a degree is helpful.
Great question.
You can say no.
Yeah, definitely not. Not at all. Not at all in hindsight. I think that, I was advised to go to Wits by some people who I kind of knew a little bit in the art world. They thought that particular school would give me a particular grounding, conceptually, that they saw as important. And I'm very glad I did go. It's kind of a double-edged sword. It's on the one hand, this was a very difficult place to find one's creative legs. I think that like early stage of carving a path creatively is so it's so vulnerable, and so much like protection needs to be given. It's like a plant. If you're trampling on the same path every day, nothing's going to grow there. And I think that Wits didn't necessarily give the space for that. But I think I also knew that going in. There was something like that a lot of people had told me that Wits is, and universities and institutions that are molded in that particular way are like kind of engineered to break you down as an individual and then give you kind of, I don't know, a platform to build yourself back up again. And I don't know if I agree with that philosophy, but so there's a few things. Wits definitely gave me, from an artistic standpoint, the ability to articulate myself about my work. There was a lot of talking. There was a lot of like critical theory and writing about one's practice, a lot of research. And I think that with the trajectory that contemporary art is headed in, that's a very positive thing. And I'm very glad that I did that, because talking about one's work and engaging the public is something that like any successful artist has to be able to navigate. However, I think that I only developed an artistic language and a genuine studio practice once I left. But the frustration of being in an institution like Wits, where I didn't feel like my early, uncertain, vulnerable creativity was being like protected and allowed to grow, also meant that there was a lot of frustration that built up. And I was fortunate that frustration built, because then I was allowed to channel it in a very productive way. So I took all the work that I've made, as part of assignments for the university, or that was about to be critiqued by different lecturers. And instead of like allowing that work just to like be critiqued for 4 hours, be hammered and smashed and like taken apart and then take it back to my studio and allow it to die there, I instead took that work and brought it out into the world. And I started submitting it to shows and just getting the ball rolling. I had this incredibly utopian university experience where my work was loved and I was coddled. I might have like simply been satisfied with staying there. But I think the dissatisfaction then led into like, a real sense of having to take action. And I'm very glad that I did, because, getting that ball rolling early has allowed me to be where I am now.
I mean, it kind of sounds a little like when you have to do your driving theory test. Like, no one learns how to drive until they get on the road.
Yeah.
So you have to.
That's a great analogy.
Get all the checks and things done. You have to get the certificate and get through, and then you learn it by nearly crashing and/or going freewheeling. So, tell me a bit more about. I don't know. You actually choose which you think is more relevant to start with. Whether we talk about the Dior bags or your current exhibition.
Dior bags. let's start there. Yeah, complete surprise. Caught me out the blue. Not something I imagined I'd be doing at this stage of my career, or even like any stage of my career for many years. And really an honor to be a part of it. And the artists that are included in this year's the fifth season of the Lady Dior Art Project are all like artists that I've looked up to and really admire. And so yeah, it's incredibly exciting. I had some work up in London during the London Art Fair week, like Freeze and Pad and whatnot, and I had two large pieces with Southern Guild at the Pad show that I think was quite close to Mayfair, just outside the Saatchi Gallery, and they were featured by Forbes. Both works were featured in the top 5 works of that fair, and the response to them was incredible. And then suddenly, I get this email saying that Dior is invited me to collaborate on this project. Would I like to submit some ideas and play with it? And at this stage, I had no hopes of this actually happening. I thought it was just like one of those, you cast your net wide and you see what happens, but you don't get your hopes up. And so we sent through a couple of ideas based on existing artworks, because that's kind of the platform that this collaboration has facilitated in the past, where artists kind of bring their own aesthetic to what Dior's done. And yeah, with zero expectation, suddenly it materialized, and we began the process of actually making the bags. So with the initial proposal, which was done in last year November, not last year November, 2019 November, because 2020 was kind of non-existent. So 2019 November, and then 2 of the representatives from the Dior team flew out to Cape Town, and we met up in February 2020. They came with 2 massive suitcases of like little goodies and kind of different parts of the bags, like 50 different handles and little samples of what they put together based on my designs, little ideas. And that experience was really eye-opening for me, because we kind of just played around for 3 or 4 hours, just combining different things, making aesthetic choices, making formal choices, realizing that there were like practical elements you had to consider when making a bag, like weights, for example. You can't have like a 15-kilogram bag that someone's meant to actually carry around. Whereas with my artworks, the only questions I need to kind of resolve is like, will this thing hang on the wall, or will it tear the entire wall down? And once I've figured that out, it's kind of like, well, anything goes. But with the bag, the questions were kind of different. But I found that it was an incredibly exciting opportunity. And I think especially that initial design process where we're physically playing with different components of the bag really reminded me of a child playing with Lego. And I used to do that all the time when I was a kid. And just the kind of freedom of that gesture, not too concerned about what this means, but really like just trusting your intuition, running with things. Bottle tops on a Dior bag, or like changing the O in a bottle top in the Dior charm into a bottle top opener. I felt like those are really kind of playful, quirky gestures that if I thought too hard about, I probably wouldn't have done. So I really like the kind of spontaneity of the project, and it's great exposure. Like for someone my age, at my stage in the career, it's almost unheard of. So I'm just a very, very happy boy and very excited by everything.
Yeah, well, congratulations. It really is such an incredible accomplishment. The more I read about the kind of stuff that you've been doing, it does seem like it's perfectly, what's the word I want? Ironic that you're covering your bag in toothpicks, and bottle tops.
Yeah.
It's a really amazing kind of commentary on this weird world that we live in.
I think so. I mean, well, when I started working with the toothpicks, one of the first things that I noticed was my inability to control the medium, because there's so many little pieces and they all want to fall different ways and they want to do their own thing. And, when I stepped back from that chaos, I realized that at a distance, suddenly they transformed into something completely different, whether that for some people represents like fur or animal skins. or whether it suggests, some sort of organic growth like coral or like, viruses, or I don't know. The references seem to be endless with that. But, in that case, it really made sense if I'm using this material that's so overlooked, but, in the ways that I work with it, it transforms into this like signifier of luxury in the case of like a fur coat. Then, that kind of dialogue, bringing that into the space of high-end luxury, which a Lady Dior bag occupies, I thought was a really considered gesture, and went just beyond the aesthetic and started to like kind of comment on maybe, things like the opulence of that kind of industry, and I guess the consumerism of the fashion industry and that kind of high turnover of that world. And I think that also, in very subtle ways, you mentioned irony, but you think of like a high-end event where someone would wear a Lady Dior bag and people would be drinking champagne there, or really fancy wine, not necessarily beer. So there's this kind of like playfulness of putting a beer opener on a bag. And when I was interviewed by Dior about like the decision behind that, I actually, kind of had this flashback memory to this one scene in this film by the name of Malena, where Monica Bellucci kind of like is stunningly dressed. She goes into this old like Italian town, and she walks through the town square and takes a seat down, and like everyone's just like spellbound by her. She takes out a cigarette, and before she can even light it, like 15 men are just like leaning in trying to light her cigarette. And I thought that this thing of putting a bottle top opener on a Dior bag was very exciting, because it kind of flipped that association. Like maybe it's the woman who's walking up to a man struggling to open this beer and opens it with her like high-end Lady Dior bag. So there was a little bit of fun to be had there. And I think that I do think deeply about my work, and I do do a lot of research, both my material and actually like through literature and academic writing and critical theory and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I'm playing with bottle tops and toothpicks. And there has to become a point where you step back and you don't take yourself too seriously. And yeah, I think I just try to take that attitude into this collaboration, because, if I thought about it too hard, I'd probably get stage fright dealing with something like Christian Dior has been around for like 75 years. And here I haven't even had a professional career for 5 years. So, it was, I think it was a necessary playful gesture to navigate the potential overbearing seriousness of the moment.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you've really nailed it. So is that part of the motivation, I suppose, not taking yourself too seriously, using found objects? Is that why you started using toothpicks and bottle tops in the first place?
I don't think there was a single reason, but looking back, I definitely think that that's one of the reasons. However, one of the more like dominant reasons was mainly that I was just an art student, didn't have necessarily a lot of resources to be spending on like art materials in the traditional sense of like, I couldn't just go cast a bronze sculpture or like carve a marble statue, or like even oil paints are ridiculously outpriced. So there was this real sense of needing to find a way of making work that was even feasible on a practical financial level. And I think one of the things that started happening as a student early on, as I started to kind of broaden my understanding of the art world, was, I started seeing that contemporary art was really marked. Sure, there was a dialogue with the history of art and a lot of what was happening, throughout, sort of that trajectory. But there was a real sense of like contemporary art being rooted in the moment. Like there's something about the here and now about contemporary art. And, as I started to sort of consider what to do, this idea of using materials that form part of the social fabric of our time really does allow you to say something about the here and now. So, each material that I use has a number of different starting points. Firstly, I've noticed that there's a consistent like interaction with my physical body. with all the materials that I use. So with the bottle top, for example, if we were having a beer now and having this conversation, I'd be fiddling with the cap in my hand as like a nervous tick or just something that I do. And one of the things I would do is bend the bottle top in half, and bending it in half and then twirling it between my thumb and my finger, like kind of, I kept, touching this thing. And one day I looked at it and it reminded me of a cowrie shell with the way the teeth of the bottle top bend inwards. And that was something that I would always pick up on the beach with my family in the Eastern Cape, or, on holidays, and my dad would always have competitions with us as a family to pick up them. And, and I had these little associations personally. And then, you dig into it a bit more and you find out that like cowrie shells are this pre-colonial form of currency. And then this kind of very like a significant cultural symbol in many cultures around the world. So, this material suddenly takes on a whole richness to it. And then, with the bottle top again, it's also about, this constant observation of the material in your everyday setting. So I'm walking through Braamfontein on my way to Wits, and I keep seeing bottle tops strewn in the pavement, lying outside of Shabeens. And there was this one day where this little glint of gold caught my eye in the pavement, and I went up to it with kind of this like half, hope of expectation. I don't know, being a ring or like a coin, or I don't know what I was hoping for, but it turned out to be a bottle top lying in the dust in the pavement that caught the sun. And these moments, and then after entering into this kind of like accumulation of the material through collecting it from shebeens and taverns and making friends with bartenders, then you start to notice more intricacies. Like, for example, about 60 to 70% of bottle tops across brands are printed in the color gold, and then about 20 to 30% are printed in silver, and the remaining like 10 to 5% are printed in multiple other different colors. And I found that absolutely fascinating, that gold and silver were the predominant, colors that these bottle tops were printed in. And that, I think immediately says something about our, the association of value to particular colors, and then so suddenly now, thinking about Johannesburg's mining history in relation to this production of bottle tops in the color gold, then suddenly, allowed me to ask the question, well, if Johannesburg is the city of gold, nicknamed Igoli, and the only gold you see on the streets of Johannesburg are bottle tops, what kind of diet we have to value. So, I kind of found that as I dove deeper into a material, the world started opening up in terms of what I was able to do, the questions I was able to pose. And the material kind of gives back in that way. And similarly with toothpicks, it's something that I fiddle with. It's something that I touch. It's something that I'd notice, little moments here and there. And for example, I dismissed toothpicks for 2 or 3 years before I decided to do anything with them. I took a photo of them one day in a box and then saved that photo in a folder on my phone and forgot about it for 3 years and then returned to it later. Concrete, I'm always walking through the city, touching different concrete surfaces. Some are smooth, some are rough. So these, I find that there's this bodily interaction with the material as a starting point. And from there, it's like the kind of research process just opens everything up to me.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a childhood spent playing with things has turned into a career playing with things, not in a bad way at all, obviously.
No, I love that.
It's an incredible,
a very good observation. Yeah.
Well, so now I'm also probably a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How do you transport a jillion toothpicks and bottle tops between cities and countries?
Oh, great question.
Roughly a jillion. That's how many I assume.
Roughly a jillion. Yeah. No, spot on. 1 or 2 off, but spot on. It's funny. I actually joke with people because I often have accountants or people in the finance world who end up coming and wanting to buy stuff or like, curious about the work. And one of the questions that they seem to always ask is like, how many toothpicks did you use in this piece? Or how many bottle tops did you use in this piece? And I kind of have just started to reply with, well, if you can guess the exact number, I'll let you have it for free. And the joke is obviously that I don't know the exact number. So, good luck trying to guess it. But on that just comes down to like kind of engaging with the material. So, with the bottle tops, for example, we punch a hole through the center of each one well, it depends on how I work with them, because I work with them in different ways. But like for the piece that's sitting behind me here, where I create these long coils of the bottle top and create these spirals or these like hanging forms. There we punch a hole through each one. And we've started using electric fencing cable because it's flexible, but it doesn't fray when you kind of like thread each bottle top on. And this electric fencing cable is obviously a very prevalent feature in South Africa, and but it's almost an invisibly present feature. It's like everywhere but nowhere because you don't acknowledge it. So that's an interesting thing that I'll start to tease out in my work a little bit more. This kind of like hidden component that underlies the structure of a lot of these sorts of works is something that I think has rich potential to speak to a number of other issues that I want to touch on. But with the toothpicks, for example, it's also about, okay, cool, they're wood or like bamboo or birch. So, then I need to find a glue that's non-acidic and can work with wood. And, ideally I'd want something with a long drying time so that, I have lots of time to work with it to get it into the shapes that I want it in, because this thing is like crazy hard to control. So eventually I settled on this like polyurethane sealant that's really rubbery and is very flexible. So yeah, I mean, we just kind of put them in crates and package them really well and then send them off. And part of the process, like especially last year, where I was literally for the most part of the year outside of South Africa's very intense level 5 lockdown, I was mainly just like working from the studio on a very day-to-day basis. I was like a 9-to-5 artist, really. And that time, that consistency really allowed me the opportunity to dig deep into thinking about how can I make these things better so that they transport better, so that they hang better, so that people can handle them without being afraid of that. But yeah, fortunately, some artists make equally as strange things as I do. And there's lots of people in the art world with experience of how to deal with that. So I'm not alone in my troubles. Yeah.
And so when you open next Saturday, how will people be able to kind of socially distance explore?
Sure. Well, I think for this show especially, I've kind of occupied the entire gallery. I'm not sure in terms of total square footage what it is, but I'm going to estimate maybe like 150 to 250. Horrible estimation, but roughly, like it's quite a large space. And we really have, we've got 3 rooms that are really expansive, and I've only got a total of 6 works in total on display. So the works are very spread out. People have to book, slots to come view the work or come to different walkabouts. There's 2 sessions for the public, a couple of other private things happening before and around that time. So, I think it's just what it is these days. We have to account for COVID measures, but a lot of time and effort has been put into documenting the work, both through photography, as well as like putting a little documentary film together. So I'm really hoping that we can, do a good job of capturing the energy of the show through those mediums, and then sharing it broadly. Because, even for some people who are in Cape Town and would love to come see the show, I think, everyone's just apprehensive and doing what you can and, taking as much caution as possible. So, that kind of ability to share things online is really becoming more and more crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. And another possibly stupid question from someone who clearly doesn't know. No
stupid questions.
The bits great. About art. Are they all for sale? All your pieces?
Not always. Not always. Sometimes it's always a discussion. I think in the beginning of my career, I felt that I had to make everything for sale because I was perhaps in some way feeling indebted to whoever's exhibition space it was, especially if it was in a commercial sense, because you then are very aware that this organization or this person is paying rent and they're covering these costs and this and this and this and this. But I think as I've gone on in my career, I've learned that the value of art is not always, or the value of an artwork is not always the value that one can ascribe to it in that moment monetarily. So there are some works that I've deeply regretted selling in the past, and I've had to live with that regret. And fortunately, as an artist, you can return to themes and works. And I've never remade something, but I've often reapproached something. and then if I'm especially satisfied, I keep that. With the works on show now, they're all works that I've lived with, and some of them still have lived with and been working with, but over the past 6 months. So I've seen them, I've looked at them, I've considered them every day, I've made peace with them. And so the works that are on show, I'm happy to let go. But even in this show, there is like there's 2 works actually that I've said to the gallery, look, I want to show these, but they're not for sale. So, and that's just something in terms of like confidence that I've managed to build up in myself, realizing that I don't have to make everything for sale. And some works I think maybe are very important for me to keep in relation to my practice, so that, maybe there are works that I keep and, show in different contexts or return to the studio so that they can inspire new works.
Right. Yeah. Well, that was very, you didn't make me feel stupid for asking that question.
Zero stupidity in that. No. And you know what's funny? Like artists, I think not enough artists have those sorts of conversations with each other. And there's been a lot of, I remember in 2018, I went to a residency in Dakar. And around that time, I kind of kept writing this little like note to myself in journals and notebooks that said, artists give permission. Artists give each other permission. Because I remember seeing this artist, Walid Raad, do an artist talk where his whole artist talk was a performance, but he did it in the form of a lecture. But half of it was false and half of it was true. But there was almost no way to differentiate what was true and what was false because he wove it all together so beautifully. And suddenly I realized, like, oh my word, I could have fun with the very format of an artist presentation. I don't have to like do the typical stand behind the podium, click through a slideshow thing. I could genuinely do whatever I wanted with that. And other artists, have completely blown open my categories of what's possible, both creatively and professionally. So, I think that the more, these conversations are had, the more this knowledge is shared. Yeah, the better it's going to be.
Yeah. Especially, and it's something we're really trying to do on this platform. So far, you're going to be our first non-author. We're very excited about.
Yeah, I'm very excited too.
And we're obviously wanting to branch out into all of the arts because we think that it's so important for it to kind of all be not linked. They're obviously all very different in their own ways, but to realize that there's so many creative processes that are similar, and how often a creative process can be kind of projected onto life, because that is really what all art and creation is, the reflection of what everyone's doing and feeling and experiencing. So
yeah, I agree. And I think that also, the distance that one has maybe to an artistic discipline that's not their own can be super beneficial. So, for example, if I'm listening to a talk by a writer or a playwright or a film writer or whatever, I often like come away with so much more than I would from an artist talk, because there's like a distance to my own profession, and I'm not necessarily comparing things in terms of like material and form and whatnot, but like, since they're coming at maybe similar concerns from a different angle and in a different genre, I'm suddenly able to like, reconceptualize them in new terms. So that kind of interdisciplinary conversation is very beneficial. So yeah, good on you.
Well, and thank you for coming on. We're very, very pleased to have had you. If you're listening today, it's a Thursday, and if you're watching, it's a Friday. So make sure you tune in for both audience. Thank you, Chris, for coming on. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you and hear more about something that I've seen you doing for years, but actually I've never had a proper conversation with you about. So it's been really good. And yeah, keep doing what you're doing. We're loving it. We're all following you. Yeah, well, great.
Fingers crossed.
Chris. And thank you,
Meg.
For tuning in, everyone.